You can find in your Bible 1 Timothy chapter 5. At best, I would say I am a novice at political science, socioeconomic studies. So this is just a layperson's observation, opinion, take it for whatever it's worth. It appears to me that in our society there is a lot of emphasis on privilege and rights. People want to talk about, I have these rights, I have these privileges. And there's very little talk about responsibility, about work in taking care of ourselves. And maybe this mindset is seen best in the expectation from our government. Some expect the government to pay for everything from housing to phones, from college to dental care. And sometimes I feel like more people have their hands out wanting something than those that are putting forth their hands in work. Now, biblically, I do want us to understand that salvation is a gift from God. God does all the work. You don't have to do anything. You don't deserve salvation. If you've never received salvation, I want you to know you can't come to church enough. You can't be baptized enough. You can't take communion enough. You can't do enough good works to get salvation. It is completely a gift from God. But you do receive it. You do accept it by faith. And one of the things that God's always calling in the Old Testament and the New Testament, He's always holding His people responsible for what they do. Salvation, again, is a gift, but He's calling us to be responsible for what we do with the opportunity of salvation. Once we receive salvation, what do we do with our lives? And one of the things that He holds us responsible for is self-care, care for our family, and care in our church, care for people in our church. So today we continue our study in 1 Timothy. Our study is entitled, When Knowing More Yields Less Truth. Well, knowledge might lead you to talk about your privilege, talk about your rights. Well, I have rights, I have privileges. But truth will talk more about your responsibility, talk more about what you need to do, your role, your responsibility. So that's what we're going to look at today in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 and following. So let's start by reading half of what we're going to study. So 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 3 says this: support widows who are genuinely in need, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them learn to practice godliness towards their own family first, and to repay their parents, for this pleases God. The widow who is truly in need and left all alone has put her hope in God and continues night and day in her petitions and prayers. However, she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command this also, so that they will be above reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his own family, especially for his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, I want to just look at a word there to get us going on this passage. Look at verse 3 and look at the word support. It says that to support the widows. The word support actually means to prize or to fix a value on somebody, to bestow a special mark of honor or to give favor to somebody. So support isn't just a financial thing, it's really more of an attitude. It's that we are to have an attitude towards widows in which we are to help them. Now, sometimes that help is going to involve finances, but the emphasis of the word here is more of an attitude. It's a high calling for both family and church to take care of the elderly. That's a high calling for us to have. Now, I have divided verses 3 through 16, which is what we're going to study. I've divided it into 3 tiers. It's really kind of the opposite order that Paul has in writing, but logically it's an order that makes sense to us. And so the first tier I'm going to look at is self-care. So we're going to look at verses 9 through 16, and we're going to look at self-care. Self-care means that before I start expecting the government to help me, before I start expecting the church to help me, before I expect my parents to help me, or my grandparents to help me, or my children to help me, I need to do something myself. That's self-care. There's some things I am responsible for that I need to do. Let's read the passage now, starting in verse 9. Starting in verse 9, we'll finish this paragraph. Verse 9 says this: no widow is to be enrolled on the list for support unless she is at least 60 years old and has been the wife of one husband, and is well known for good works. That is, so now he's going to list some of those good works. If she's brought up children, shown hospitality, washed the saints' feet, helped the afflicted, devoted herself to every good work, but refused to enroll younger widows, for when they are drawn away from Christ by desire, they want to marry, and will therefore receive condemnation because they have renounced their original pledge. At the same time, they also learn to be idle, and going from house to house, they are not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things that they shouldn't say. Therefore, I want younger women to marry, to have children, manage their households, and give the adversary no opportunity to accuse us. For some have already turned away and followed Satan. If any believing woman, some translation says any believing man, has widows in her family, let her help them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it can help widows in genuine need. So let's talk a little bit first about self-care. Self, that is you, me, we have the privilege of caring for ourselves, taking care of ourselves. There are some things that only you can do. Teenagers, it's your job to do your homework. It's not your parents' job. You know, college students, it's your job to show up to class, to be on time. It's not your parents' job. You know, it may be in your household that your job, and I would recommend this, your job is to take the dishes from the table and put them in the dishwasher. If you can't do that, you don't deserve a cell phone. That ought to take care of some business there. If you can't keep your room clean, you don't get a cell phone. You don't get a car if you can't keep your room clean. It's pretty easy. There are some things you need to do. It's your responsibility. The same thing is true of adults. Paul was teaching Timothy over some specific issues in the church at Ephesus. It would seem that there were some younger widows that were receiving the benefit of the church in that day and that setting, at least in Ephesus. Apparently, there were widows that they could basically live at the church, get their room and board from the church, as long as they did certain service, as long as they probably cleaned some things and cooked some things and took care of some needs. They had the privilege of living at the church or being taken care of by the church, and that was a good thing. There wasn't a problem with that. But some of the younger widows were apparently using that free time to gossip. And they were using that to be busybodies and get in everybody else's business. And Paul is addressing that. See, church is to take care of you when you're not able to take care of yourself and when your family is not able to take care of you. Now, let me unpack this a little bit more. First, each of us are responsible for self-care. Now, I'm going to give you 3 areas that each of us are responsible for. Nobody else can do this for you. First is your spiritual commitment. Nobody else can make a spiritual commitment for you. You're the only person who can make that spiritual commitment. If you've never committed your life to Christ as Savior, the church can't do that for you. The government can't do that for you. Your parents can't do that for you. Your children can't do that for you. You have to make that commitment yourself. And by the way, God is going to hold you accountable for what you do with that opportunity. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 10 says, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whatever is good or bad." Romans 14:12 says, "So then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God." We've got, this is Name Tag Sunday, and most of you have a name tag on. Every individual has a name, and every individual is going to be held accountable by God for what they do spiritually. You can reject God, that's up to you, but God's going to hold you accountable for it. Secondly, each of us are responsible for the normal ups and downs of life. Just the normal ebb and flow of life. Paul says in Galatians 6 verse 5, he says, "For each will have to bear his own load." Now we're going to study Galatians 5 and 6 in our Summer Lift series in July. We'll unpack that verse even more then. But basically what Paul is referring to is that there's just normal, everyday responsibilities that everybody has. And you're responsible for that. Nobody else is expected to do that for you. You're supposed to take care of that yourself. Thirdly, every adult, now I would give teens a break on this and children a break on this, but every adult, thirdly, is responsible to make a living. It's your job to make a living. It's your job to have a job. I know it's a couple of dirty words we need to talk about. I'll spell them for you. We won't say them out loud. One is J-O-B and the other one is W-O-R-K. Okay, that would solve a lot of problems in our society, those two words. Get a job and work. And so you're responsible for that. The government's not responsible for that. The church is not responsible for that. Your parents aren't responsible for that. You're not responsible for your parents to do that. You are responsible, each person themselves, for that, making a living. Now let me go a second step with this, and that is there's some behaviors we are expected to deal with. So Paul mentions in these verses at least 3 negative behaviors we need to be aware of. When we're taking care of self, this is all self-care, here's 3 things I need to watch for. One is self-indulgence. That's what it says in verse 6. Again, it looks like in the setting, he's talking about the younger widow ladies. And he's referring to this self-indulgence. Each of us are responsible to guard ourselves against self-indulgence. Selfishness is a contradiction to Christianity. A Christian who's really sold out, living for Christ, can't be selfish. They are a contradiction. A second thing I need to watch for is turning back from a commitment to God and the church. Now again, this context is a little different for us. In verses 11 and 12, it appears that Paul is worried about some of the younger widows taking the benefit of the church. But then, as you would expect, a younger lady would have that desire once again to remarry and have children and so forth. And Paul says, don't put them on this list because they're going to go back on their commitment. Now, that doesn't really apply in our setting, and don't raise your hand. Has there ever been a time that you made a commitment to God and then backed off of that commitment? Well, sure. I mean, has there ever been a time like, God, just get me out of this mess? I promise, Lord, if you get me out of this mess, I'll read my Bible every day. I'll go to church every Sunday. Lord, we had that in COVID. I remember during COVID when we were doing our services online, we weren't meeting in person. I had several people say, whenever we start meeting at church again, I'm not going to miss a Sunday. Well, where are you at today? Okay, are you watching online apparently? I mean, where are you at? And so it's easy for us to make commitments and then back off of those commitments. So that's something I'm responsible for. If I make a commitment, I'm supposed to follow through with that commitment to God. Third thing I need to watch out for is being an idle busybody. Now, I just take the passage, people. Don't get mad at me, okay? That's what Paul is saying. He says there's these idle busybodies. Now, I just want to paraphrase. This is the Kevin Stewart paraphrase of the verse 12 where it's talking about being a busybody. I guess that's in verse 13. He says, don't be idle, going from house to house. They're idle and they're gossips and they're busybodies, saying all types of things. This is my paraphrase, okay? Love me or hate me, it's my paraphrase. Get off of Facebook, okay? And cook something. Get off of Facebook and take care of your family. Get off of Facebook and spend some time with your wife. Stop letting social media dominate your life. Stop scrolling. I didn't get any amens. I got an amen in the first service. Second service ain't interested in that. Yeah, I see how you are. That's my paraphrase is don't be idle and a busybody. Stay busy on the things of God and it'll keep you out of a lot of trouble. I better go on to the next one before I get in trouble. Number 2, so first is self-care. Secondly is family care. Family has the privilege of caring for their own household. Now let me show you 3 things about family care. 2 of them in verse 4 and 1 of them in verse 8. Look at verse 4. I'm going to ask and answer questions. First, who is responsible for family care? Well, look at verse 4, and it says children and grandchildren. That's what it says, children and grandchildren. The word children means to bring forth, to give birth. It's a child, male or female, son or daughter. Grandchildren actually is the word descendant. Some translations, and your translation may say nieces or nephews. So it just means the next generation. Most often we would say grandchildren, but it's the next generation, whatever that is. So who's responsible for family care? The next generation. This means children and grandchildren never outgrow the privilege of honoring your parents. That fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother, doesn't have a date that it ends. It doesn't mean when you get 50, you no longer have to honor your parents. It doesn't have an end date. We are always to honor our father and our mother. And so children and grandchildren have this privilege. Children and grandchildren can and should communicate and care for parents and grandparents whenever they can. I'm thankful, in retrospect, I'm thankful that Diane and I, and you helped with that a lot, that Diane and I were able to take care of Diane's mom the last 4 months of her life. We were able to move her from Texas and move her in with us. And again, some of you helped us with that so that it was a little easier for us. But we were a little anxious. To be honest, there was some apprehension. You don't really know what that's going to look like. But what I found is that God honored that. Now, I'm not saying everybody can do that. I understand not everybody can do that. But God honors when you take care of the older generation, whether it's your parents or grandparents. God honors that. Everyone can care at some level, and every child and grandchild can communicate with their parents and grandparents. So that's who is responsible, children and grandchildren. Second part of verse 4, what are they responsible for? Well, verse 4, the second part says that they are to learn to practice godliness with their family. Don't look at your family if they're in the room, but let's just be honest. Sometimes family is the hardest people to take care of. Sometimes family are the ones we don't want to be around, okay? And so, but he says to learn to practice that. In other words, it might not be easy, but we are to learn to practice taking care of family, looking out for family first is what it says. We're to do that first. And then he says that practically we're to do this because our parents took care of us. Now notice what it says in verse 4. It says, repay your parents. Now I don't think that means cent for cent, dollar for dollar. But what I think it means is an attitude. Hey, your parents took care of you. My parents took care of me for a long time. It's only appropriate when they get to a phase in their life that they need help that I help take care of them. By the way, the few older people that are in the room, me, there'll come a time in our life when we have to allow them to take care of us, which is sometimes hard for older people to do, but that's part of the process as well. And in fact, it says in verse 4, in the last part of verse 4, that this pleases God. It actually makes God smile for you to take care of your parents and grandparents. Now, I wonder if the reverse is true. That when we don't take care of our parents and our grandparents, that it displeases God. That it is a direct act of displeasement to God. That leads me to the third thing about family care found in verse 8. Why are they to provide for their family? So why are children and grandchildren supposed to provide for their family? Well, verse 8 gives two things. One, to not do so is a sign that you're not a person of faith. That's what it says. I didn't make it up. It says you're not a person of faith if you don't do that. So did that stretch Diane and I a little bit? Did we have to stretch in the area of faith? Most definitely. Will it stretch you? Most definitely. But also, even worse than that, it says in verse 8, the last part of verse 8, it says you're worse than a lost person. It says, even unsaved people will take care of their parents and grandparents when they're aging. He says you're worse than an unbeliever if you won't do that. So we've looked at self-care, family care. Thirdly is church care. The church has the privilege of caring for those in genuine need. Let's go back to verse 3. Remind you of that word support. That word support means to honor, to prize, to bestow special marks of honor and favor upon. It's not just money, it's an attitude. And the church is to do this to people who are in genuine need. That's what it says in verse 3. The word genuine means surely, indeed, without doubt, in fact. In other words, this is a person that in fact, they have real needs. Verse 5 describes some of those real needs. It says they're left all alone. This means someone who's desolate. They don't have any family to take care of them. They can't take care of themselves. They are desolate. Whether we like it or not, the church has to use decision-making in who they take care of. I know you find this really hard to believe, but there are actually people who will take advantage of the church. Did you know that? There are actually people in the church and outside the church, individuals and families, that will milk the church to death. And so sometimes, and I would actually say more times than not, we have to say no. And the reason why we're saying no is so we can say yes. We say no to some because the need is not genuine or the need is self-imposed, so that we can say yes to those who have genuine needs. Very rarely do I tell a story that puts myself in a positive light. Normally I am the butt of the story. A few weeks ago, I'm at Brookshire's in Monroe. I'm getting ready to check out, and I've got, just a few items. In front of me is a lady, and she may have been the most godly Christian person. I'm just telling what I saw. I'm just telling the story I saw, okay? She's in a electric wheelchair, not one that she got from the store, but one that, was hers. I guess that's how she got to the store, which is fine. She's bought a few items, 3 or 4 food items and a 4-pack of toilet paper. And then she's there at the cashier and she's wanting to get some cigarettes, which, hey, that's up to you. It doesn't matter to me one bit. Buy all the cigarettes you want. I don't care. But she gets ready to ring up and she doesn't have the money. She's going through, she's fumbling through everything she can, trying to find enough money. She can't find enough money. There have been times, a few times, again, I normally don't make myself the good person in the story. There have been times in situations like that, I'll just pay for it. It's not a big deal. I just bless somebody. But I'm thinking, I ain't paying for her cigarettes. I'm just not going to do that. I pay for everything else, but I ain't paying for her cigarettes. I'm just not going to do that. She finally has to give something up. Guess what she gave up? The toilet paper. Now that is a self-imposed problem. That is a self-imposed issue. I'm not going, and the church shouldn't feel an obligation to help those that are self-imposed issues. Those who have genuine need, it is a glorious opportunity for us to help. James 1, verse 27, talking about helping widows, he says, it's pure and undefiled service to God. It's a pure service to help a widow that's in need. The beginning of the church in the book of Acts, they were helping widows. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew people helped widows. Paul addressed 2 categories of widows in this passage. First, older ones, and then younger ones. So let's break it down. In verse 9, older women are to be enrolled on a list for support. And he names, or he numbers older widows as being at least 60 years old. That's what he says in verse 9. Now, I don't think 60 is very old at all. In fact, I think 60 is very, very young. But y'all probably think 60 is old. Back then, 60, because of the life expectancy, 60 was quite old. Now we wouldn't think anything about a 60 or even a 70-year-old, a widow or widower remarrying. We wouldn't think anything about that. Back then, that would have been very, very unusual because the life expectancy would have been early 60s. So it would have been very unusual for a woman to remarry at that age. And so that's one of the qualifications, is to be at least 60. Also in verse 5, this person is to be a prayer warrior. Godly widows in our congregation have proven to be the powerhouse of prayer in our church. I'm just telling you, if you want somebody to pray for you, you find an older widow lady to pray for you. She'll pray circles around the preacher, I can tell you right now. You just find one, ask him to pray for you, and they will pray for you. They are powerhouse prayer people in the church. Third qualification of the older widows, it says in verse 9, they're to have a good marriage record. In other words, they're not to be loose women. Also in verse 10, it says they're to be known for their good works. In other words, they don't have to tell you what they're doing. you can look and see all the good works they're doing. And it lists some of those good works, such as taking care of children, hospitality, being willing to act like a servant, which was what a servant would do, would be wash the disciples' feet, taking care of the sick. These widows were cared for by the church, but they also offered a service to the church. The very best senior ministry we do is from senior adults. I make more nursing home visits now than I have my entire ministry. I shock pastors in our association when I tell them once a week I make nursing home visits. They're like, you pastor that big of a church and you can still go to nursing homes? You know why I go? I'm checking it out to see where I'm going to be, okay? I mean, I'm right there. The best ministry to senior adults is normally from senior adults. Just so you'll know, your church, McClendon, does 3 things for our seniors. Some widows, widowers. And maybe you don't know these things, and so I want you to know what we do. One is we give a stipend each month to some of our seniors that need it for basic needs. This came out of COVID. Coming out of COVID, there was a national organization that we helped fund to take care of these seniors and their basic needs. And someone said in a finance committee, someone said, why don't we do that with our own people directly? And we have been doing it since then. So people, we don't want any of our seniors choosing between buying food and buying medicine. Now remember, they need to do what they're supposed to do. They need to do their job. The family needs to do their job. But after that, we don't want our seniors having to make that choice. And so we give some a monthly stipend. Every month it comes to them, a check to help them. A second thing that we do is we deliver 24 meals to the homes of some of our most elderly people on Mondays and Wednesdays. And the goal is the meal, you're supposed to get 2 meals out of it. That's the goal. So basically, we try to give them 4 meals in the course of a week. That ministry involves about 80 people in our church. So it may be somebody once a month, they make a salad. Somebody else once a month, they make a dessert. Someone else once a month, makes the main dish. It's just a lot of different people are involved. And then we pack it here and we take it to their house. They don't even have to get out of their house. We take it to their house. I'm wondering, how many of you are involved in that ministry at all? If you are, would you please stand? We had a bunch in the first service. There's got to be some. There we go. Jimmy, stand up. Okay. There was a whole bunch in the first service, okay? So we got about 80 people that are involved in that ministry. And that ministry came out of a need I saw in my in-laws. They were too weak to cook for themselves. They weren't eating right. And I thought, we should not let that happen to the people of God. We should not allow that to happen. That's how that ministry developed. A third thing that we do is all of our shut-ins and our older members are assigned a deacon who is supposed to check on them once a month. And sometimes that check on them is just a phone call. But I want you to know, you need to know that your church is trying to do this passage. That's why I wanted to illustrate that. So first, the older widows are put on this list. Secondly, younger widows are warned. So the older ones are put on a list and the younger ones are warned. Paul seems to imply in verse 11 and 12 that some may be taking advantage of this, but using that free time instead of serving the church, they're getting in everybody else's business. And so Paul warns them and he says, don't put them on the list. They need to be busy in the things of life. A third thing to look at in verse 14, we are all warned to not give the adversary an opportunity. We are warned not to give the adversary an opportunity. Now, the direct charge in verse 14 is to younger widows, but the application can be for any of us. Young, old, male, or female, it can apply to all of us. Satan, the adversary, the accuser, is always alert and looking for opportunities to invade and destroy the Christian and the Christian family. Now that word opportunity in verse 14, or your translation may say occasion, That word actually is a military word, and it means to set up a military base at. So Satan is looking for a way to set up his military base inside your soul, inside my soul. He is looking for an opportunity. And Paul says this busybody this business, this idleness, that's actually giving Satan an opportunity to set up a base of operation, which is one of the reasons why one of the 4 challenges I gave us 2 weeks ago in our 40-day exercise challenge was to keep our minds busy on the things of God. Just a reminder, 2 weeks ago, I gave a 40-day challenge. It was supposed to start that Sunday and go through July the 4th. And it consisted of 4 things I challenged us to do, which were all spiritual disciplines. One was to read the Bible and pray every day. Second one was to come to church and actually be engaged. That was the thing I emphasized, is don't go to sleep, be engaged when you're at church. The third one was that we were to listen to Christian music and read Christian literature as much or more than we watch Fox News or we're on social media. How's that one going for us? Yeah, it's a struggle, isn't it? But the reason why is when our minds are idle, and let's just be honest, there's nothing more mindless than social media. All it does is make me jealous because of what I'm seeing, and apparently my life is not that good. It makes me envious. It makes me covet what other people are doing or what other people have that I don't have. So it's pretty mindless. It only does a negative thing to me. And so I need to move out of this idleness by putting godly thoughts into my mind. The fourth of those challenges, you might remember, was to serve people, to serve both believers and non-believers. Well, here's a great example. Serving the elderly is a great example. It's highly honored in the Bible. Serving widows is highly exalted and honored in the Bible. Let's close out with a couple of thoughts. As you watch your family and you watch your church care for people. So maybe you're watching your family, maybe it's a good example, maybe it's a bad example. You're watching your family care for people. You're watching your church care for people. Does it challenge you in any way to start caring? Does it motivate you? Does it push you? Does it challenge you in any way to care? It ought to. Secondly, what areas of self-care has God convicted you of? Let's just be honest. There's some things only you are responsible for. I'm not responsible for your spiritual growth. I'm responsible to teach the word. You're responsible for your spiritual growth. What are you doing in self-care? Is there any conviction in that area of self-care? As Jimmy and the musicians make their way to the front, I want us to bow our heads and think about some thoughts here for a minute. I want you to think about this with your head bowed, just listening to God speak to your heart. Satan has you on his radar. Self-care prevents Satan from setting up his base of attack. Let me say that again. Satan has you on his radar. You may not know where he is, but he knows where you're at. And self-care prevents Satan from setting up a base of attack. If you have never committed your life to Christ as Savior, I started off by saying that that's a free gift. You just accept it. Here in a moment, we're going to sing a song. You can come to the front to Brother Alex or myself and just say, I'm ready to give my life to Christ. For the rest of us, we have been challenged to care for those who really have genuine need, and also to accept care from others when we have genuine need. God, use this message to help us be a more effective, caring church to your people. And God, also use this to challenge me and the rest in this room to care for ourselves in those areas of responsibility you've given us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.